Thank you for listening to this PodcastOne production. Available on Apple Podcasts and PodcastOne.
The Steve Austin Show is brought to you free today by our friends at BetOnline. The NFL season is winding down with the Super Bowl on the horizon, but the sports betting action continues to stay blazing hot with the NHL, NBA, and college basketball all keeping things interesting. Get in the mix at betonline.ag and use the promo code PodcastOne for your 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts and exclusive partner of PodcastOne Sportsnet.
PodcastOne presents Steve Austin Show Classics.
Every week, we are bringing out some of the most requested episodes of the podcast from behind the archives. We have another great one for you this week, and here's my producer, Sean, to tell you all about it.
What is good, everybody? It's producer Sean with another classic episode of the Steve Austin Show. Thank you for joining us today. We are staying within the Canadian theme that we started last week with Trish Stratus, and we're going to jump a week back in time from that episode for episode number 17 with Lance Storm. Original air date June 4th, 2013. Lots of stuff here about pro wrestling, of course, that Steve and Lance get into. Lance Storm, just one of the smartest dudes in pro wrestling as far as I'm concerned. I really enjoy hearing him on his podcast appearances. I used to do a lot of stuff on Wrestling Observer Radio and, of course, his own podcast, Killing the Town, that he used to do with Cyrus, a.k.a. Don Callis. But Lance, of course, known as being a straight and narrow guy as far as his resistance to vices on the road, which in turn has led to a long marriage, a very happy home life, and relatively not as troubled as some people may get in the pro wrestling business as they retire or get down the line in their careers. Lance also talks about at length about his pro wrestling school, the Lance Storm Wrestling Academy, which unfortunately is no longer running because Lance is now a producer with WWE. But at the time when it was running, which had ran for, I want to say over 10 years, I believe, Lance has been responsible for training a lot of current WWE superstars, including Tyler Breeze, Peyton Royce, Oni Lorcan, also Chelsea Green, who just debuted on the main roster as well as NXT, and Emma, or Tennille Dashwood, who currently is in Impact. So yeah, he's got a pretty good track record and one of the highly regarded trainers in pro wrestling to this day. And maybe the academy will open up at some point in the future, who knows, but he's had a great track record, and this is a great episode. There's some cool stuff in here about Lance and his thoughts working in Japan as well as working in Germany with Fit Finlay and Fit Finlay's Prime. Also, there's a few cool stories in here, one particularly about Lance meeting Steve Austin for the first time in the midst of the Invasion angle. He has a story about that, as well as what he considers to be the proudest moment of his career in wrestling. It's something that you may not expect, but it's really cool to hear about it, so stick around for that. All right, this day in Steve Austin history, let's get into it. Today being January 23rd, we start off in WCW in 1993 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Of course, it's the result that you're going to hear a lot about in 1993 because these teams fought each other a lot. WCW NWA Tag Team Champions Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas defeated Steve Austin and Brian Pillman. Then we go to the WWF in 1996, San Jose, California, at a WWF Superstars taping. It's the ringmaster, Steve Austin, with Ted DiBiase in his corner, defeating Fatu. If you remember, this was a program that was started because Steve Austin was accidentally eliminated by Fatu in the 1996 Royal Rumble. And I remember distinctly this being this was probably Steve's first ever full-on program in the WWF back then. So something to take note. Also in 1997, we wrap it up in Oklahoma, where Stone Cold Steve Austin defeats Goldust. I get my information from the history of WWE.com and ProFightDB.com. All right, folks, stick around. We've got Lance Storm coming up on this classic episode of the Steve Austin Show.
Well, how about it? The NFL finally has its two teams for the biggest game of the year as the Super Bowl is just on the horizon. We've got a week off from the NFL, but that doesn't mean the sports betting action is going to take a break. Check out these huge NBA games. We've got the Clippers versus the Mavericks, the the Sixers up against the Raptors, the Nuggets taking on the Rockets, and a huge rivalry game between the Lakers and the Celtics. Visit our good friends and exclusive partners of Podcast One, Bet Online, to take advantage of the best bonuses in the business. Sign up today for a free account at betonline.ag and use the promo code PodcastOne. Again, that's BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts and exclusive partners of Podcast One Sportsnet.
Podcast One presents the Steve Austin Show Classics.
All right, professional wrestling. I love it. I lived it. I love to talk about it. I'm here today talking to Lance Storm, a distinguished veteran of over 23 years inside the square circle. This man held over 13 championships during his run. Right now, he's running his pro wrestling academy in Calgary, Alberta, the Lance Storm Academy. Lance, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
What's going on right now? With school in session? What's going on at the academy?
Yeah, school is in session. I run my school a little bit different than a lot of people, where I'm just not open year-round and you can join whenever you like. I'm a firm believer in training the way I did, where everybody shows up and you start on the same day. I run a 12-week program that we start at, your first bump and move all the way through up into ring psychology and having good matches. And when everybody starts together and trains together, I think it's a good bonding experience, and it's a way to make sure you don't miss things. So I'm 3 weeks into this new session, and I've got some good people.
Now, when you start a course, okay, you go through the 12-week course. Then how long is it before you start in another school, another session?
I take a month off. I got off the road because I wanted to spend some time with my family. So I run three-month sessions a year, so I get 3 months holidays a year.
Well, let's talk about your schedule. Spending a lifetime on the road, a lot of people can fathom, truck drivers and stuff, but for the most people, not so much. The business of professional wrestling keeps your ass on the road. When you're there at the school, you're running your 12-week program. How far are you driving to and from work?
I'm about 15 or 20 minutes. When I got off the road, I wanted to shrink the radius of my world. I got tired of being away from home and running those long hours, behind the wheel or on planes. So I try to keep my life as close to home as I can. I'm one of the fortunate ones that managed to stay married my entire career. My wife and I are just past our 19th anniversary. So staying home and close to it is a good thing for me right now.
Let's talk, man, I want to talk to you about your school because I get asked so many times about good schools for people to go. Yours is always high on the list because everybody in the business while you were there respected your ability in the ring. You did a lot of badass stuff. Very solid in the ring, lots of dynamic moves, and almost seemingly a whole lot of Japan styles, and I want to cover that. But let's talk about staying married for 19 years in the business of professional wrestling, or really for entertainment for that matter. But since we come from the world that we come from, how in the hell did you do that? And before you answer that, I know you're a very unique human being. You're a very smart guy, you think a lot, you read a lot. How did you stay married so long?
The biggest thing is, to me, I think it's about prioritizing. Also, too, I'm a very stubborn man, and early on in my career, I had a lot of people telling me that, your relationship's not going to last, and if nothing, I'm the guy that's going to prove you wrong. So right from the get-go, I was very determined to not fall into the traps that life on the road often presents itself. So I really stayed focused on being loyal and faithful to my wife, and that's part of the reason why I wasn't a big party guy on the road either. If you go out and drink with the boys and hang in the clubs and do different things, a lot of opportunities present themselves, and I didn't want to put myself in a position where opportunities would arise. So I spent a lot of hours by myself in hotel rooms reading books, and again, not going out when you're in Vegas because there's trouble to be had in Vegas. So I focused really hard and made a real serious commitment to my wife, and I expected her to trust me on the road, so I thought it was my duty to be trustworthy. And we toughed it out, and I had a very understanding wife that wanted to have a family and stick to it, and we did. And that's also part of the reason why I got off the road at a younger age than most.
Guys in our business, they run together in different packs. Everybody kind of has their different circles they run in. And I was kind of always in that drinking circle. So, I wasn't really a guy that's going to go to strip clubs. Wasn't my deal. I was more of that lounge lizard guy. I was going to hang at the hotel, not have to drink and drive, just do my drinking, my thing that I was doing, and kind of chill. And I certainly found my share of trouble hanging by myself in the lobby. But on top of what you're saying, not only did you avoid the situations that you were going to be placed in, but many, many bad decisions have been made by the boys or myself on the road due to the influence of alcohol or whatnot. You seem to avoid that as well.
Yeah, that was, again, I've never been a drinker. I have drank twice on the road. There is a camaraderie issue with the boys at times. And my first run in Europe for Otto Vaughn's group, tensions were mounting because I wasn't seen as one of the boys. So I did go out drinking with the boys once. And that seemed to satisfy everybody, and I got really drunk. And then I did again once in Japan. But it's, again, I had a dad who drank a lot, and I had a brother who drank and did a lot of drugs and had issues with it. So I was very anti-alcohol and drug right from a kid. I think I'm probably the only kid that didn't go out drinking, when he became legal age to drink. So I was adamant that I wasn't going to be a drinker right from the get-go. So, I avoided that, and it was tough at times. Early on, thankfully, I broke in with Chris Jericho, and he's one of the more likable guys you can meet and like, and he'll go out party with you. And so he gave me a bit of a buffer early on when I wasn't going out and drinking with the boys. He's like, "Oh, he's okay, don't worry, buddy. It's just not his thing," and helped me out in that regard. And then eventually, when you get accepted as one of the boys, then the pressure goes away a bit. And I avoid it. But yeah, like you say, everybody rides with their own packs. There's the strip club guys, there's the guys that want to drink. As we know, there's guys that like to do the drugs, and there's guys that like to do other things. So you find your group, and you hang with them, and stick by what you believe in.
Well, let's talk about drugs for a second. I had Terry Funk on the show a few weeks ago, and we kind of delved into it a little bit. And, I dabbled in that world, not seriously at all. It really wasn't my cup of tea. Did I take a couple of pain pills here and there? Yeah. A couple of muscle relaxers here and there? Yeah. Sleeping pills here and there? Yeah. As a tool to get through the grind of what I was going through. I wasn't a guy that was taking 25, 30 gimmicks a day of whatever it was going to be. But my point is, you hear all these people, a lot of our friends, many guys close to us, dying at an early age because running their systems too hard, the physical toll that the ring takes on your body, with everything else, running too hard, and the drug or alcohol use, cats dying at a young age. Every now and then, someone will die, and someone will say, "When is Vince going to do something about this?" My take on that is, it ain't Vince McMahon's fault. I think a grown man, should be held accountable and responsible for anything and everything he puts in his body. Would you concur or would you defer?
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think Vince is doing, way more above and beyond than he's required to. Because at the end of the day, we are adults, and we're going to work, and Vince is paying us to do our job and go to work. What you do at 2 o'clock in the morning after you're done work really is none of Vince's business, in my opinion. There are a lot of pitfalls, and it's tough in the business because, like you say, everyone's going to get banged up. There's a physical toll, so there is going to be the need at times for some kind of medication, be it from surgeries or bumps and bruises. So everyone's got to keep themselves in check, and hopefully your riding partners will help you keep things in check. But at the end of the day, we're adults, and it's not the wrestling business. To be honest, a lot of it is it's the road because, if you look in the music industry, guys in bands end up messed up.
There's that boredom on the road. I mean, with excitement and doing what you love, there's excitement, but there's also boredom. But then there's also the lonely periods where you miss your loved ones, so you're self-medicating, everything starts snowballing, and it turns into a monster for many, many people.
I think it is, and I lecture my students at length several times on the potential pitfalls of the business. And again, a lot of it is loneliness, and I think a lot of it is too the need to sleep. If you banged up your shoulder that night and you don't get any sleep that night. You're really worn out. And then you're on a plane and you're wedged in a plane and your shoulder's hurting. And, that second night's sleep, you haven't slept in 2 or 3 days. The interest in, hey, here's a sleeping pill, here's a whatever you have to get you through the night. It's easy to go down that road. And again, going down that road as far as, taking proper amounts and doctor-prescribed pain medication and so forth is not a problem if you can keep it in check. But again, at the end of the day, it's like, Vince McMahon's not my babysitter. I don't need him telling me how to live my life. It's his responsibility, and he can tell me how he wants me to do my job. And if my life adversely affects my job, then he has, the right to step in and either get me to change it or fire me. But I don't need Vince McMahon or any job I have trying to govern my life. It's a tough job, and there's easy pitfalls, and you just have to be aware of them and try to be responsible. And, the loneliness of the road is a tough one. And when you have a lot of money and you've got time on your hands and you're bored or lonely, miss your family, I think if you want to understand this, if you get a chance, William Regal's book, Walking the Golden Mile, because William Regal is very open that he had some serious drug problems back in his WCW days. He talks about it was the loneliness of being away from his country and feeling like a stranger in a strange land that first led him down that path. And, it's a path, thankfully, he managed to get off of, but he admits openly that, he probably should have been dead a couple times over. Yeah. But it's just being aware of the pitfalls before you get there, which is why I try to lecture my students.
But when you're lecturing your students, and from the road that I've been down, and again, I never had to check into a clinic. I always had a good handle on everything that I was doing, and admittedly, I was doing some things. But from the standpoint of where I'm at now, the things that I've done just through experience, from been there, done that, when you're talking to your kids, what's the average age of these kids coming into your camp? Obviously, they have a high respect for you. But is this information well received? Are they soaking it in? Are they taking to heart these words of knowledge that a cat like you and I can deliver? Are they serious about this? Or, are they, well, hey, I got to go in there and experiment too because everybody else does. I'm pretty damn transparent. The shit ain't good for you. Stay away from it.
Yeah, some do and some don't. The average age is probably 18 to 25 is the majority of my students. I get a couple older than that. 18 is the minimum. I won't accept students younger than that. I think they need to mature and grow before they get on this job. I think some listen and then some don't. There's always going to be that situation where you get on the road, it's fun. It's like when kids go to college, you want to go out there and drink and you want to go out and party because this is your chance to, be the big time, have your party. So they're going to do that, but I hope that they remember enough that in the back of their mind they, at least have, and a lot of them jokingly call me Papa Storm, on his shoulder, whispering in his ear, it's like, make sure you don't get out of hand. Because again, having a few drinks and partying with the boys, there's nothing wrong with that. But if it turns into a 6-night-a-week occurrence, and then again, mixing it in with pain pills and other things, and that's something that I really harp on. It's like everything you're going to do in your life is going to chip away at your longevity. If you're going to be a drinker and you're going to be a pill guy and you're going to be a party guy and you're going to be a recreational drug guy, you're probably going to end up dead.
You're exactly right about that.
So again, if you want to go out and drink and party, then, have at her, but make sure you don't get on any other roads and don't make it, a permanent lifestyle for yourself. And hopefully they listen. And I get some students that, 2 years later, I'll get an email or a phone call with, I was thinking about doing this or thinking about doing that. And it's like, I'm feeling pressure. And it's like, I have a talk with them. And it's good when they're willing to come to you, 2 years down the road and still looking for advice.
Well, and the thing about, the wrestling business and, maybe entertainment in general, but I can only speak from the world that I come from. And I never even saw a pain pill until I was riding down the road one time with someone and they said, hey, man, you want a Vicodin? And I said, what's that? Oh, you don't know what that is? And so it's easy to get started on this stuff just by hanging around the guys that are already doing them. The 411 comes pretty quick and easy. Then comes the peer pressure along with that. It is what it is. But to anybody out there listening to Lance Storm and myself, stay away from all that horse shit. If you want to drink a couple of beers or have a little bit of whiskey or vodka, that's one thing. But leave all that other shit alone. It is what it is. And don't want to talk about drugs all day long with Lance Storm. You run a highly respected school, the Lance Storm Academy. We talked about a 12-week program that you start, and you go about a month between each class or each new group that you bring in. let's talk about, what you're instilling in these young athletes when they come into your school. Is it bump intensive? Is it mat wrestling? Is it storytelling? What's your protocol? How are you laying out your training?
It's all of that. Obviously, the first month, it's bump intensive, because if you can't bump, you're not going to last. But I also try to run them pretty hard cardio and physically wise to give them an idea of the kind of shape they need to be in. And I start with the basics. I try to teach them good mat wrestling and cover all the basics. Big thing, I'm not a move guy. Anybody can learn moves when the time comes. And this is something that I've learned from working a lot of different places, Japan, Europe, Canada, the U.S., a lot of different places. To me, the fundamentals of storytelling and working are the same. And you can alter it slightly for your audience and add some moves if you will, but I don't just bring kids in and start teaching them how to do flipping power bombs and diving twists and so forth. You've got to learn that basic storytelling. You've got to learn basic mat wrestling. And I try to cover as much of everything as I can so that when you go out there, you can adapt to any situation. And I think that was my strength throughout my career, is that I could work with anybody. If you wanted to go out there and brawl and fight, I could do that. If you wanted to go out there and mat wrestle, I could do that. If you wanted to go out there and just be a high spot flippy dive guy, I can do that. And I worked with a lot of people you never would have thought I did. I've had one-on-one singles matches with Abdullah the Butcher in Japan. And I've worked with the original Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama. And it's like when you can adapt and understand the working concept and the emotion. Because if you rely strictly on moves, you're probably going to be crippled before you make any money.
I agree. You got to be able to tell a story, and it starts with a good firm lockup. So many people just want to get out there and flip, flop, and fly, and it ain't about that. It's about telling the story. Do you do any kind of promo stuff there in the school or character development?
I work on basic promo do's and don'ts, and I have probably. It'll depend on how good they are in the ring as opposed to promos. I'll do between 3 and 5 promo days throughout the 12 weeks, and trying to give them just a basic foundation on how to conduct and structure a promo. And it plays into ring psychology, because I find that, again, good storytelling in the ring or good storytelling on the microphone, you still have the basic idea and layout. You have to pace it. You have to give people a chance to think about what you're saying, and you need to end on a strong note, which, again, if you're having a wrestling match, it's very similar. You can have your spots and you can have the stuff you're doing, but if you don't give people time to think about what you're doing, they're not going to absorb it. And again, in your match, you want to end on a strong note so people remember it. Same concept with a promo. So I work on that. I don't get too much into trying to develop individual characters for everybody, because once they go out and try to get bookings, sometimes, you've got this great character, I want to be a heel, but you go to an indie promotion and you need a babyface. Well, you're a babyface kid. But you try to give them that foundation that no matter what hand they're dealt, they can put the cards together and make a decent hand and play a game of poker with it.
There's so much, learning that goes into a school or program that you're in, whether it's Lance Storm Academy or for myself back in the day, gentleman Chris Adams, and we basically, Chris came from a little bit of a judo background with his brother Neil being in the Olympics. It was all about the bumps. It was all about learning how to fall. And we'd go out there and slap the shit out of that mat hour after hour. It was all about falling. Then we learned a little bit of chain wrestling and then just basically a couple of moves. And so when I had my first match, I was fundamentally sound. But to a large degree, the business of pro wrestling is like many others. It's on-the-job training. Have you expressed this to your kids?
I have, although the thing that's hard is that there aren't as many people to learn on the job with anymore at the indie level. Mm-hmm. Because when I was trained, I was taught basic execution and how to bump and then sent off, and I was lucky to work with some good veterans. Oddly enough, I actually did a tour of Lebanon with Chris Adams and worked with him.
How was that?
It was in 1992. We got screwed on our money. War broke out, and we had to leave with gunshots going off. It was a horrible time. But I tagged with Chris Adams on 2 or 3 of the shows. He was the top babyface because world-class television was strong in the Middle East for some reason.
What kind of state of mind was Chris Adams in at that time?
Seemed to be pretty good. We got along well, but I felt that there was a tension there for some reason. I didn't know why. I was pretty green, though. This was 92, so I was only, a year and a half into business. Mondo and Chavo Guerrero were on the tour as well. Were sort of the bigger names that were on the show. And it was certainly a great learning experience for me, but he was in pretty good, seemed to be in a good mood, and again, worked really well.
He was a good worker, very solid mechanically. I remember when I came in and, went through school, had the long blonde hair. He saw something in me. We started feuding together, and, he would always get the win when he needed to win. I would always get the heat when I needed the heat. He was smart as far as business goes. And then, every now and then Chris would go off and be Chris. And, he kind of had that dark side. But, when he was having a good day, he was a charismatic, likable guy that you had fun being around.
Yeah, he was. And again, he was one of the first, I'd only had maybe a half a dozen people that I'd actually seen wrestle on TV or on tapes that I got to work with at that point in time. So I was pretty excited to work with him, and had a good time. But back to the on-the-job training with school, with there being less opportunity to work with, guys like Chris Adams when you're green and to learn is why I really harp on ring psychology a lot, so that you don't have two guys out there with 6 months experience working each other. You try to give them that foundation, hoping that they can pass it on to others, and use it. And I'm a hands-on trainer. I'm in the ring with my students every day.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you have anybody helping you out, or is it just you in the ring with these cats?
It's pretty much just me. On occasion, because I've got some past students that are quite good that are still local. So if they have a day off, they'll be like, hey, do you mind if I come down? And then I'll have them help with demonstrations. But I'm a perfectionist, and I'm a real stickler for detail, so I'm a hands-on guy. I'm in the ring wrestling with them every day. And I have a minimum, usually two, but I have a minimum of one full match at the end of class with every student, where we'll do anywhere from a 10 to a 15-minute match.
How many students do you typically have in a class?
12 is my favorite number. I'll go as high as 15 because sometimes you get dropouts and cancellations, and I don't like having too small of a class because I got a lease and rent to pay. But I aim for 12.
How much ring time does that give you in the ring with each person while you're there teaching?
I run 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for the 12 weeks.
Right.
And sometimes classes go long. If I'm in the groove and things are going well, we continue on. But so it's however many hours that is. And again, when we're tying up and taking headlocks, I'm the one doing the first one with them. And when it comes time to taking those first bumps, and also too, just for a safety situation, if I'm not 100% sure this cat's doing, say, a suplex correctly, I'm taking the first ones to make sure nobody gets hurt. Because again, I've been doing this so long now, you got to really screw up before I can't take care of myself. And obviously, from a liability standpoint with the school, you want to try to be safe. You can't afford to be getting kids hurt. So it's a lot of ring time, and I take a lot of bumps, and I run a lot of drills. But I'm a lead by an example guy. So when I'm telling these kids they need to be in better shape, I'm 44 years old, and if I can get in the ring and run them into the ground where they need a break, I'm like, you need to push harder. I'm a 44-year-old guy that's not looking for bookings, and I'm in better shape than you.
Pro wrestling fans, listen up. WWE Hall of Famer and one of the greatest to ever step between the ropes, Jerry the King Lawler. And I don't think we'd have it any other way. Join the King and his co-host, Sean Reedy, as they get together to reflect on Jerry's legendary career, from Memphis to the WWE to just about everywhere else.
Let me ask you one question. Who's the greatest wrestler in the world?
Download new episodes of The Jerry Lawler Show every Friday on Apple Podcasts and PodcastOne. And if you love the show, tell your friends and leave a rating and review.
We're going back in time to stop a mud hole and walk it dry. It's the Steve Austin Show Classics on PodcastOne.
I wanted to ask, with all those years in the business, with a high-flying style you had mixed with your base ground attack, how are you feeling these days physically?
On the whole, I'm pretty good. I've got aches and pains, don't get me wrong.
Did you have any major injuries?
I never really had any major ones. When I decided to get off the road full-time, I was starting to have lower back issues. That thankfully I ended up getting diagnosed about a year after that, and I've got them under control now. But I haven't had any major injuries, which is fortunate, obviously, touch wood. I've got some minor issues with my neck that just started last year. All my discs and stuff are good. I've just got a narrowing on one of the nerves in my neck, so I have to be careful about certain things that I do. A lot of stretching and strengthening. I'm just not allowed to do bridging anymore because I don't want any more compression on it. But on the whole, I feel really good. Other other than, again, the shoulders ache and the knees ache at times, but I never had a major injury. And I had cartilage scoped in my knees maybe 3 years ago, just to trim them up because it was being problematic. But other than that, I've never had a surgery. And for the most part, feel pretty good.
And that neck issue, is that causing any tingling or numbness in your fingertips?
No. I get headaches. I get a little bit of dizziness, sort of like seasickness a bit. Symptoms were like a concussion, but I knew I hadn't banged my head. So after getting it looked at finally, it was determined that there's just a little bit of narrowing on the nerve. I'll find I get a little bit dizzy if it's bothering me. But if I do my stretches and my exercises, I pretty much have no symptoms. I'm just not supposed to bridge to further compress my neck, and not supposed to have lifting my chin up really high and looking up makes it worse. So I tend to keep my chin tucked because it just allows more movement. And other than that, I've had no problems at all.
Now, when you say you had your lower back diagnosed, what did they diagnose it with?
I ended up diagnosing it, oddly enough, from reading a novel.
You diagnosed your own back reading a novel?
Yeah, because my back was bothering me. WWE sent me to, MRIs and doctors and everything else, and nobody really found anything. And I was reading a novel, and the character in the novel was complaining about back problems, and I'm reading it going, this sounds exactly like what I have. So I looked it up online, printed it out, and took it to my doctor, and is this my problem? He's like, might be. So we did the therapy for it, and it's there's a psoas muscle, which attaches to your flexor and to your lumbar. And mine was in severe spasm, and it was tilting my pelvis. And it was straining my lumbar, and when I bumped, I was landing on the sciatic insertion at my pelvis and causing, tingling and strength loss in my one leg. So once I started getting the therapy and the stretches for the psoas muscle and relaxed it, my problem pretty much went away.
Yeah, let's talk about your ring style a little bit. How would you describe your ring style from back in the day?
I don't know, because I always preferred being a heel, so I always liked to adapt my style to what I needed. I'd like to think it was more just a traditional worker. I think William Regal likes the journeyman term, which I'm a big fan of. That when I worked in Japan as a junior heavyweight, I worked that junior heavyweight cruiserweight style that was a lot more athletic. But when I worked in WCW, I worked more of the traditional wrestling sports entertainment style, if you will, and same when I went to WWE. I'm a firm believer that when you know how to work, the rest gets easy. And there's a lot of people that I had a hard time adapting to this style or that style, and I never had that difficulty because again I find that the basic fundamentals are the same, and if you can get that emotion, you can add the rest in. So I just like to think I was a traditional worker more than anything else. Yeah,
but sometimes when I think about your work, now you started in Calgary, but then right off you went to Japan, correct?
Went to Europe first and learned a lot of the European style, which is very mat-based. I got to work with Fit Finlay when he was, in his prime in Europe.
That guy's one of the best ever in the history of the business, and a lot of people don't know that name or, saw a bit of his run in WCW and WWE. Fit Finlay is tremendous.
He's fantastic, and he's one of those guys that always looks legit. I've never seen a moment in his match that it just didn't look believable and legit, and I got to work with him a lot in Europe, even before he hurt his leg in WCW. And he was the man. He was the top heel in Europe and just, grabbed that crowd and held them. And I learned so much working with him. I was a babyface when I worked with him. And, a lot of the good English guys, Dave Taylor, who worked in WCW for a while, another great mat guy. So I learned a lot of the mat European style there. And then when I went to Japan, learned a lot more of the junior heavyweight high flying style there. So I took a lot of flavors from a lot of places, which I think helped my versatility.
But then when you got back from Japan, didn't you go right to Smoky Mountain?
Smoky Mountain was before Japan. I did Europe.
Japan, okay.
Then the 1 year run in Smoky, which was, Memphis 101 almost. And then went to Japan.
Okay, I was thinking you came out of Japan and then went to Smoky, and I was thinking, man, when you talk about, you can work, but there is a big difference in stylistically from Japan work and Smoky Mountain.
Yeah, it really was a big difference. But I think what helped me is I was tagging with Jericho in Smoky Mountain, and he was working in Mexico and Japan before Smoky. I had just done the European tours. So Jericho was on that cutting edge of, high spots and, that early 90s junior heavyweight style. And we go into Smoky Mountain and we're working Well Done, who are, Memphis, Tennessee 101.
Right.
And it was a really good mental exercise for me, because I was a traffic cop trying to speed up Well Done a little bit, but putting the reins on Jericho to try to find some way of meeting in the middle.
Yeah.
And again, it was one of my first real realms into being a ring general and trying to control the action, because I had Well Done who were really good but very Southern style, and I had Jericho who was awesome but, you know, was working 100 miles an hour more than Memphis wanted. Trying to bring those guys together was a hell of an exercise for me, and I think we managed it relatively well. But and then it was after that I went to Japan on a regular basis.
Did you like Japan?
I really loved Japan, and I think part of it was I hadn't found myself as a character or a performer yet. I was still very much a wrestler and relied on the in-ring stuff more than having any speaking ability or personality. If you see any of the promos I did in Smoky Mountain, I was awful. So Japan was just a straight-up sport. If you were a good athlete and could wrestle, you know, that's what they wanted.
Exactly.
So I loved it.
Yeah.
It was physical, which, again, I tended to work on the lighter side of things, but I didn't mind getting in there and having to fight either. So I liked the physicality of Japan and the sport aspect of it, because we were respected as athletes over there. So I really enjoyed that. But it wasn't until ECW that Paul Heyman actually let me find Lance Storm. So I was really just Lance Evers' athlete, you know, and they called me Lance Storm. But when I got to ECW, Paul Heyman's the one that actually brought a personality and a character out of me.
Well, let's talk about, you know, your body of work. I mean, through the major federations that you were in, you know, WWE, ECW, WCW, and Ring of Honor. But let's jump right into ECW. And because, you know, Paul Heyman was so instrumental in my career, and you just brought his name up, what did he do for Lance Storm? How did he help you put the pieces together, or how did he turn that light bulb on in your head?
I think the biggest thing is he just pointed me at the switch, and he let me turn the light on myself. I was really good friends with Chris Candido because we had worked in Smoky Mountain together.
Yeah.
And so he put me in a program with Chris because he saw us talking and hanging out and knew that we had a good chemistry. And I've got a lot more personality than you would think when you first meet me. So he saw that I was comfortable with Chris. So he put me in a program with Chris and allowed us to interact to each other. And he knew Chris could draw it out of me because we were comfortable with each other. And he didn't tell me what the end product or character that I was going to have needed to be. He just put me in situations where I could develop, and it really helped. And he just gave me a guiding hand. And when the program I was supposed to do with Chris Candido, I was supposed to stay the babyface. He just wanted me to turn me heel enough that I had an edge and would be accepted as a babyface.
Right.
But I jumped into it too much, and the crowd was going the other way. And Chris and Paul pulled us aside and said, well, sorry, Chris, you're going to have to go babyface in this. Lance is the one getting the heat out of it. And so we switched it. Yeah. And he just let you find where you were. Then once I had finally turned heel, it's like this was my calling. I just loved it, and it was easier.
Let's talk about that. You said being a heel is easier. You're reserved as a babyface. Had a hard time going out there on that limb, much in the way I was when I first started. What is it about being a heel that you dug?
I like the control aspect. It's easier to direct all the traffic and run the show. Me personally, I'm not selfish enough to be a babyface.
Right.
You know, to be that top babyface, you've got to be a little bit selfish because you've got to be Superman and you got to make sure that you own it. And I always was a little bit reluctant. I didn't want to take too much because, again, with the work aspect and so forth, I always felt like I was holding back. Whereas a heel, I had confidence that I could get my heat. So I made sure I gave my babyface a lot to make sure that babyface got over. Because I'm a firm believer that the babyface is the one that draws the money. You got to have that hero. And I had confidence that I can still get my heat and do my stuff. But as the babyface, I always wanted to give too much. So I found the heel role worked better. And I'm a bit of a natural smart ass. And I like being that heel personality.
But that being said, that natural smart ass, you found it being easier was, to me, as a heel, you can do anything. And my take on the heel aspect was I had the freedom to do whatever the fuck I wanted to, how I wanted to, and never have to worry about having any egg on my face. As a babyface, you can't have an egg on your face. You do too many times, mister, you're going to shit the bed, you're done. So I really enjoyed that part of the heel aspect. The control as well, and I called a lot of my stuff anyway because I'm half deaf. I had to because I can't hear, but it was that freedom that being a heel afforded me that really let me just let it all hang out, so to speak.
Yeah, it really was, and I just like being in the driver's seat, and I was suited well to it in that, again, to be a good heel, you got to be versatile. Because, you got a brawling babyface, you can't go in there and mat wrestle with him. And if you're in there with Rey Mysterio, it's like, well, I can't brawl with him. That's not his thing. So it suited me because I could put on whatever hat I needed. And like you say, I had no problem getting egg on my face. You know what I mean? I realized that, sometimes you got to tuck your tail, and that's your job. But I had confidence enough that, I'd still get mine when it was needed. And you could always bring it back. But like you say, as a babyface, if the crowd sees through you and go, wait a minute, he's not who we thought we were, you're lost. So you've got to be a lot more careful as a babyface. So that freedom as a heel, I found really rewarding.
Let's talk about some of your work in Ring of Honor. That's a smaller promotion I've really enjoyed, and I don't see a whole lot of current, Ring of Honor stuff going on. I haven't seen a whole lot of it in general. A lot of the stuff that I have seen is very refreshing, and a lot of old school mentality. Now, sometimes that being said, the guys end up kind of outworking themselves and overdoing the mannerisms, but I appreciate where they're coming from. There seems to be almost seemingly to me from a spectator and a fan, they've got a lot of freedom to kind of work with their characters in any way they see fit and push the envelope accordingly. What was it about Ring of Honor that you enjoyed, or anything that you didn't enjoy about that particular promotion?
Again, I only did a few shows for them. I was never, in the company, so to speak. I just came in for a few specific matches because I had a good relationship with Gabe Sapolsky originally because he was in ECW when I was there. And it was the opportunity to work with just a few individuals that I wanted to work with. He talked me into coming in and considering working with Bryan Danielson, now Daniel Bryan. And I was so impressed with him that I'm like, I could do something with this guy. We could really have a good match. So I took the opportunity and really enjoyed it. And it was nice to have all the knowledge and experience that I had at that point, being, I was 18, 19 years in at that point, and going into a company where Kerry Silken, who was the boss at the time, just walked over and it's like, we would like Brian up, but other than that, do what you like. And it was so nice to have that freedom to, we can go as long as we want, we can do it all we want. And I took it too as because up until that point I had been coaching some of the guys. Gabe would send me DVDs, and I'd offer feedback to the boys, as well as Gabe on the product and their matches. And some of the guys would listen, some of them wouldn't. I took it as an opportunity to go in there and have the match with Brian and show that I'm not just blowing smoke. And I really enjoyed the match with Daniel Bryan. The guy's awesome.
The guy's a hell of a worker. I'm enjoying what he's doing in WWE. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's solid as hell. Great worker, great psychology. In the business, if you can work your ass off, you'll always have a job. And, there's a lot of bigger people in WWE right now, but due to the fact that they can't work half as good as he can, he's going to keep working himself into a great spot that he sits in right now.
Absolutely. And then I ended up working the program with Chris Hero, who's now Cassius Ohno in developmental. And it was just a case of he earned my respect. He was a guy that was doing a lot of comedy and a lot of stuff I didn't agree with. And I don't sugarcoat stuff. If somebody asks me my opinion of their match, right, I'm going to tell them. If it's the shits, I'm going to tell them it's a drizzling shits. And I hit Hero with some pretty harsh criticism. And he said, yes, sir, thank you very much, and I'm trying to work on that, and worked with me and would take advice. And I noticed a huge change. He had, again, got rid of the silly costuming and serious stuff and was getting really, really quite good. So the opportunity came to come and do a program with him and give him that little bit of a boost of putting him over in the end of it. And they had actually, when they asked, said, you could come in and do 2 shots. If we can put him over in the tag and then you can beat him in a single, would you come in? And I'm like, well, I'll come in, but I'll beat him in the tag and put him over in the single. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, that'd be great. I really appreciate it. And I'm like, well, I'm pretty much, 3/4 retired at this point. I don't need the win.
Right.
So I come in and worked with him, and because he earned my respect for taking the criticism, doing something about it, and really improving, I went in and worked with him and enjoyed it. And then I got to do similar with, I'm drawing a blank on his name, Mike Bennett, recently. And it's just rewarding when you get the guys that really want to learn and have that respect, and want to learn the craft and not just do 3 flips off the top rope, but they actually want to get in there and work.
But it's also interesting when a guy asks a cat like you or me for advice and you drop the real 411 on them, and they kind of, they're green. Maybe they're thinking you're going to put them over, And like you said, if someone's going to ask me what I think, I'm going to be just like you and hit the nail right on the head. So when you take a guy, break him down and say, yeah, not so much. It's kind of the shits, too much comedy, too much this, that, or whatever. It's advice that they've got to hear, because if they don't hear it, they're going to keep going down the wrong road and never go forward, all the while thinking they're the cat's ass.
Yeah, and it's rewarding when you get those guys that will listen. And again, I don't expect blind obedience, but listen and put some thought into what I have to say. And if you just want to hear you're the greatest, then you probably shouldn't ask.
Hey, I want to ask you a question. I was watching some YouTube videos last night, and I watched your WWE debut. Well, was it F back then? I can't remember, but I guess WWE had just brought WCW. You came in. Shane was out in the limo. You come in. Anyway, there's your big debut in the company. That was your first night in WWE, correct?
Yeah, and I think it was almost 12 years to the day. It was either the end of May, beginning of June.
And you've been all over the horn prior to that. And with that being said, everybody knows that the WWF, WWE is the show. When you rolled in that night, I think you hit a guy with a wheel kick or something. You went back out to the limo with Shane. But what was your feeling when you made your debut after all your years and the miles you journeyed into the company?
It was cool, but I didn't know about it until almost the last minute, so I never really had time to think.
Really?
They told me I was just coming to the show to meet with Jim Ross, because they had flown other WCW guys to the office to get just your orientation, welcome to WWE. And they said, we're not going to fly you to Connecticut because we're in Calgary next week, so just come to the show, you'll talk to Jim. I'm like, okay. And I had my gear in my car because I'm not an idiot. You always have your gear.
You know the deal, brothers. Always have your gear.
Yeah. So somewhere around like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I think it was Johnny Ace come up to me. He's like, you got your gear right because you're working tonight. And I thought he was ribbing me. I'm like, yeah, fuck off, Johnny. You're just ribbing me. He's like, no, seriously, you're running in. I'm like, yeah, whatever. And he left. And then I think Dean Malenko came up to me later, and he's like, oh, you got your gear right. You're running in. I'm like, yeah, quit ribbing me, Dean. And then I finally realized they were serious. So I had to go out and get my stuff. And I was worried that the run-in was so quick and without an introduction. I was afraid the Calgary crowd, because it was in Calgary, my hometown.
Yeah.
I didn't know if the crowd would realize it was me in time to pop. So I'm scared to death thinking, if these guys don't recognize me and react, I'm dead. Because they're expecting a reaction here. And again, they were really on me with, you got to fire up and go crazy, and, you got to celebrate when I super kicked Perry Saturn.
Yep.
And so, by the time I realized they weren't ribbing me and got my shit on, it was time for the show. So I didn't have too much time to think. But when I hit it and got the really good reaction from the crowd.
Great reaction. Did
the nice reaction, did the bit with Shane in the limbo. It was pretty damn cool. Like you say, say what you want about anywhere else. WWE is the show. And it was really cool, and an interesting footnote in history, being the first WCW guy to come and appear on WWE, sort of, as far as still being a WCW contracted guy when he came in. But it was pretty damn cool.
Lance, when you get 23 years in the business, and now you're teaching these young cats the ways of the business. When you watch today's product, I mean. What do you think when you're watching this? Because, seemingly it's just a greener product in the ring right now, and that's nobody's fault. It's certainly not the people's fault in the ring. They're just on the green side. And we're used to back in the day, most of the guys in the ring had damn near 10 years experience. Or if you were a green guy, you were working with a guy that had 10 years experience. What has been your take on just the way the business has changed from working more holds back in the day to it being a little bit more short attention span theater with more high spots, quick cuts to commercials and, a lot of different quick cuts and not quick transitions more so than, working holds in and out of holds and telling more of that story. It's the business has changed so much. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm still old school enough that I prefer a slower, methodical match that builds a little more emotion. I think that's what we've lost the most, is we've lost some of the emotion of the struggle, because I think that at the heart is what draws them in. It's, wanting to see that guy they love overcome, and having that these two guys legitimately don't like each other. And I think having that emotion and believability is getting lost at times. Not always, but it does, and it becomes more about, I guess it's the difference between art and paint by numbers. At the end of the day, when the picture's done, it can still be good if the original layout of the paint by numbers was good. But I'm still a believer that a match needs to be an organic entity that grows naturally in the ring. And I think that's important. Although before we go anywhere else, I've got one question for you. Do you remember our first interaction backstage at WWE? Because I do, and it was almost one of my big faux pas. And I'm curious if you even recall the story when I tell it to you.
Man, what happened?
It was when you first joined the Invasion. And, where all the Invasion guys are in the ring, and they announce that you're the guy jumping ship and joining us. And you come out to the ring. And again, my gimmick was that, I was just Joe Serious, Don't smile, don't laugh, I'm taking it all serious. And you come out and you go to all four corners and stuff. And the segment's over and we're backstage. And you come up to me. And I have no idea if you were hot or not, but, you're a fiery person. And you're like, God damn it, kid, give me some emotion out there. Me joining the Alliance is supposed to be a big deal. And I don't know what exactly I said, but it was something I was trying to explain that, it's my character, I don't smile or do anything. And then you walked off because you had other things to do. And I'm sitting there going, I think I just butted Steve Austin. And if you don't know in the wrestling business, but is a bad thing to do. You got somebody who's, again, you were the biggest damn thing in the business at the time. Again, you could argue you're still the biggest thing in the business, but you were the biggest thing hot as can be. And you gave me a piece of advice to, God damn it, give me some emotion out there. And I made an excuse and said, but. And I'm like, I got to nip this in the bud. Because there's always that microscope on you when you come to a new company. And I ended up tracking you down later in the day, and I just want to apologize. I read the situation wrong. Absolutely. I'll definitely give you more emotion in the future. My bad. And you're like, don't worry about it, kid, and walked off. And I'm like, I wonder if he even noticed that I butted him.
Man, I was wound so tight back in the days, everything was going crazy. I do remember that now that you bring it up. I can't remember it verbatim, but man, that was, those are fun times. And there was just a lot of, testosterone, adrenaline going on. The excitement was high, and there was always, when I always get asked questions about that period, and I forget a lot about a lot of that Invasion stuff. So, that was an interesting day at the office for sure. But before we sign off, I want to ask you what you are most proud of, your proudest moment in the ring, or your proudest moment of your career.
I don't think I can name one moment, but there was a couple times where I think as being in camp when I was training with Chris Jericho, and he can back me up on this, I remember telling him I would rather be a Brad Armstrong than an Ultimate Warrior. And Warrior had just beaten, Hulk Hogan for the world title at the time. But it's like, I wanted to be a respected worker more so than a superstar. And I achieved that. And it's that respect. And I've had several people who had some injuries and so forth, actually say, I need to work with you for the rest of my life. And I've had guys coming off injury that have specifically asked me, or actually office, if they could work with me. That, I'm coming back, I'm not 100%, can I work with Lance? And it's like, that's what I'm most proud of. That Tommy Rogers is an example in ECW had neck surgery.
Yep. And
he had done a couple 6-man tags, but he hadn't had a real match and really taken any bumps or done anything. And we were shorthanded on a show in Florida, and Paul's like, Tommy, is there any chance you can do a single? We're shorthanded. And he's like, oh, God, Paul, I haven't really even taken bumps yet. I don't think I have that in me. And Paul's like, well, you'd be working with Lance. And he just said, okay, and went and grabbed his boots. And it's like,
pretty good.
That's the kind of compliment that was important to me. Because anybody that knew Brad Armstrong knew that cat could work.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what I wanted more than, again, being world champion and everything else. Granted, the money would have been better being world champion than being Brad Armstrong. But having the respect of the boys and knowing that when you were announced that you were working with me, you were happy about it.
One other question going down that road, but and not on a specific match of who you worked with, where you were, but what was one of the biggest satisfactions you had in the ring? To me, it was just like the whole experience, whether it's going to the ring, it was the pop. I remember, well, for me specifically, laying in a pool of blood in WrestleMania 13, having faced Bret the Hitman Hart, and all I had to do was lay there after I'd passed out, and they continued to work, finish the angle. But I was just very satisfied that we were able to accomplish the task at hand with a double turn. And that was one of the happiest days of my life, laying there in the middle of the ring in Chicago at the Rosemount Horizon. What gave you the best satisfaction of just being a performer? Was it taking the crowd on a ride? Was it the adrenaline rush? Was it just the camaraderie or the respect and the trust that went into the match between you and another guy? What stood out like that for you?
I think the trust, but it's also getting that emotional ride. And I think probably the time that is best, I wrestled Terry Funk in Amarillo, Texas.
Oh, wow.
It was in WCW when I had the U.S. title. And Terry had done all the local promotions, so the arena was, if it wasn't sold out, it was jam-packed. And I had always admired Terry Funk. I got to know him in Smoky Mountain and ECW, but I'd never worked with him and always wanted to. And it was a house show, so they let us switch the title. I dropped the U.S. title to him in Amarillo, and I won it back from him the following night in Lubbock. But that night in Amarillo, the crowd was just so amazing. And to get in there and do that ride with somebody I respected so much.
Yeah.
And we really, we had our finish, and I think one false finish. Other than that, we just went out there and fought each other. And the crowd, and Charles Robinson actually had a handheld and recorded it and got me a copy of it. And it was a special night that the emotion when he won, the crowd went insane, and it was so emotional. Bill DeMott and a few of the guys from MIA, who I was feuding with on television, they come out and lifted Terry up on his shoulders. When we got to the back, Bill and Chavo and those guys were thanking us for letting them be a part of it, because it was just an emotional night. And Terry was getting up there, and Terry's been, beat up for 1,000 times over.
Yeah.
He's middle-aged and crazy and tough as nails. And he come over and hugged me and said, "Thank you for taking care of me." At that point in time, I was almost in tears. The emotion we got out of those people, and Terry come over and hugged me and said, "Thank you." And I'm like, all right, this is the best day of my life.
Here we are in 2020, and that means it's time for a fresh start. A good place to begin should be with your bank account, so why not save some cash with our friends at Geico? With Geico, it will only take you 15 minutes to save 15% or more on car insurance. Geico has been offering great rates and great service for over 75 years, and anytime you need help, you can speak to one of their trained specialists 24/7. Go to geico.com and start saving cash. Extra money in your pocket? It may just be the most rewarding thing you do today. All right, everybody, give me the go-home cue. It's time to wrap up this podcast right off in the sunset. Don't forget to rate and review the Steve Austin Show on Apple Podcasts and now Spotify to tell your friends to check us out. If you want to reach me here on the podcast, send an email to questions@steveaustinshow.com. Hey, man, Broken Skull IPA continues to blaze its way across the United States of America. Big expansion in for 2020. Thanks, everybody out there on the East Coast, for being so positive to our arrival over there. People are going crazy for this stuff. It's selling out everywhere. Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, thank you very much for the support. Trying to break into Texas in 2020 and a couple of other states. So please visit the ElSegundoBrewing.com website. Check out the interactive map of Broken Skull IPA and find out the location nearest you where you can find what I consider the best IPA in the United States of America. Hey, don't forget, King of Attitude shirts, Broken Skull Ranch shirts, ProWrestlingTees.com/Steve Austin for those shirts. Cold Steel continues to produce the Broken Skull knife and the Working Man's knife. Two badass, very sharp knives to help you do work, protect yourself, or open letters. Everybody should have a pocket knife. Check out mine at the Amazon store. Amazon has the best price on both knives. Just go to Amazon.com/shop/Steve Austin. And I want to say one more thank you to all the fine sponsors of the Steve Austin Show, especially Geico, NetSuite, and Bet Online. That's how I'm able to do this podcast for you twice a week for free. Please support them because they support us. And if you need more info, check out the show description to this episode for details. If you see me out riding in the woods, I'll proudly be riding a Kawasaki. Folks, until next time, my name is Steve Austin, and I will catch your ass down the road.
Thank you for joining us for another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show. Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends. For more Steve Austin Show, go to PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.